Pirta called Daisy inside the room, and as she did, Daisy noticed the mosquito bites on Pirta's face. Daisy wondered how those mosquitoes could harm such a sweet face. After Daisy entered the room, Pirta told her to settle down and then started explaining her drawings one by one. The first drawing was of the first time Daisy met Pirta. The second one was of Pirta and a pumpkin because she likes pumpkins. Daisy also noticed that the Duke and Hattie were standing near the door, watching Pirta explain the drawings one by one. There were many different drawings, and Pirta was the main subject in many of them. However, there were a few drawings that she wanted to give to Daisy, each one made with Daisy in mind. Lastly, Pirta showed her a drawing and said it was a gift to celebrate the 30 days since they had met. Daisy was really touched by this gift and hugged Pirta, telling her that she loved the gift very much. From that day onwards, Daisy developed a habit of putting Pirta's drawings in frames and hanging them on the wall. While Daisy was looking at the drawings Pirta made, Pirta came running towards Daisy and told her that she wanted to read with her. Daisy quickly agreed and started walking towards Pirta's room. As they walked, Pirta explained that reading is very important. As soon as they reached the room, Daisy noticed that the Duke was sitting inside Pirta's room, sitting on her chair. Daisy asked the Duke if he wasn't supposed to be in his office, but the Duke looked at Pirta. Daisy wondered if they had fallen for one of Pirta's schemes again. However, Daisy later thought that she shouldn't jump to conclusions as the Duke likes to spend as much time with Pirta as possible. Pirta was roaming around the room, making Daisy feel dizzy from watching her walk in circles. Then there was a knock at the door, and it was Hattie. Hattie informed the Duke that there was an urgent matter needing his attention, and was glad to find him here. Daisy and the Duke wondered why Hattie was talking so strangely. He handed the Duke an envelope. It was a fancy envelope from the Imperial Palace. The Duke looked a bit tense upon seeing the envelope and said he couldn't believe it was already time. Pirta mentioned excitedly that they were going to a dance. Daisy had no idea about this. Hattie asked the Duke if, this year as well, he was going to go alone. He also mentioned that, once again, the Duke would receive many proposals. Daisy wondered what he meant by proposals. Hattie also hoped that this year the Duke could be accompanied by someone, noting it wasn't like he could put on a dress and go with him. Pirta already imagined Hattie in a woman's dress. Daisy had no idea what they had been talking about earlier, so she asked Hattie. Hattie informed Daisy that, as it was her first time hearing about this, it was a social event held once a year at the Royal Palace, the largest ball in the entire empire. All members of the imperial family would be attending. Daisy thought about Lipman the 19th, Empress Annet, as well as first Prince Glenbrenter and second Prince Edward Chester. The Duke mentioned that the second prince was probably still a child. Hattie was surprised that Daisy knew so much about the imperial family. Daisy thought to herself that of course she knew everything about it because the ball would be a chance for her to meet another male suitor. More importantly, she was the one who created that character with her heart and soul. Daisy remembered the character she created, long hair down to his waist, emerald green eyes, an obsessive lover capable of destroying an entire family with his bare hands while smiling. Daisy thought this character was exactly her type, but as of now, he would still be a child. Hattie mentioned that this was the only ball that the Lord of the Magic Tower attended. Daisy was shocked to learn this. The Duke asked Daisy if they could talk in private for a moment. After they went outside for a walk, the Duke told Daisy that he remembered the second prince and the next Lord of the Magic Tower were key male suitors, but the prince was a character she created herself, a giant and obsessive lover. Daisy was proud of the character she created. She wondered if the second prince would be seated in the crown prince's seat in the near future. The first prince was 15 years older than the second prince and not very interested in becoming the crown prince, perhaps because the second prince would end up being the suitor. Daisy couldn't believe that her beloved characters would appear at this ball. Suddenly, she remembered Hattie mentioning that the Duke would be receiving many proposals this year. Curious, she asked the Duke, but after asking, she questioned her thoughts and tried to change the topic. The Duke mentioned that it was nothing important, just an invitation from the Imperial Palace that he must attend, no matter how tiresome it may be. Many nobles with debutantes and their families would attend, so there were several new faces every new year. Daisy thought this would be a place for nobles from across the entire empire to gather. It would be a battle of the stars, and she wondered who would be the brightest of them all. Since the Duke didn't show his face in high society much, this would be a rare opportunity for the nobles and ladies who lived far away to meet him. It was only natural that talk of marriage would be buzzing everywhere, but all these thoughts bothered Daisy very much. After thinking for a minute, Daisy asked the Duke if they needed an extra maid at the ball. When the Duke asked the reason for this, she mentioned that she would like to meet Prince Edward at least once. But Daisy thought it was useless and left for her room. Later that night, the Duke informed Hattie that he would be writing his reply. He wrote something on a piece of paper and asked Hattie to leave. As the Duke asked Hattie to leave the room, Hattie noticed that the Duke was colder than usual. Suddenly, he saw Pirta running towards him. He told her that she shouldn't be out here by herself so late at night. Pirta asked if the Duke was leaving. Hattie began to say that he was, but Pirta interrupted, asking if he was going with Daisy. Hattie asked Pirta to keep her voice down, wondering if she was very curious to have come running out like this. Hattie informed Pirta that the Duke did seem earnest but didn't think the Duke would be so cautious about revealing his feelings. Pirta held Hattie's hand and told him not to worry as she was there. Hattie and Pirta were not the only ones curious about the Duke's reply. The next morning, Hattie informed Daisy and Pirta that the Duke had left for Utina early in the morning and would be back the next day. Daisy asked why he left so early, and Pirta complained that Hattie should have woken her up. Hattie told Pirta that the Duke had visited her room, but she was asleep. Daisy looked at Pirta and praised her for her good behavior, even when the Duke was not at home. Pirta told Daisy that she wasn't lonely because Daisy was there. Daisy was confused and asked what she meant. Pirta replied, "You would be lonely without Dad, right?" Hattie and the other workers were shocked and stared at Daisy. Daisy, feeling uncomfortable, asked Pirta why she would be lonely just because the Duke was not there. Suddenly, Hattie took Pirta away to another room, making an excuse. Daisy wondered why they were acting so suspiciously, and thought that since the Duke would be gone until the next day, it was a great opportunity to expose Pirta and Hattie. After a while, Hattie was entering Pirta's room, but Daisy was keeping an eye on them. Pirta opened the door and asked Hattie to come in as he was already late. Daisy, listening to their conversation, thought that Pirta and Hattie were plotting something. As she entered the room, she noticed that Pirta and Hattie were using a ladder. Hattie was helping Pirta get a book from a high shelf, out of her reach. Hattie explained to Daisy that Pirta had asked him to take down her drawing papers because Rhodazin was coming today. Pirta, very happy, told Daisy that she had written a letter to Rhodazin and received a reply. She needed the papers with Hattie's help so she could finish the drawing and gift it to Rhodazin. Daisy realized this was why Pirta had told Hattie she didn't have much time. Hattie informed Daisy that Pirta couldn't find her, so he had to get the paper himself. Daisy felt embarrassed and apologized to both of them. Pirta and Hattie looked at each other and exchanged a strange smile. After Daisy realized that she was doubting Pirta and Hattie for no reason, she stopped her investigation. Pirta was really excited to meet Rhodazin and called Daisy to come quickly. As Rhodazin arrived at the mansion, Pirta ran very quickly, jumped from the last 2 stairs, and hugged Rhodazin. Daisy was worried while watching this as Pirta could hurt herself. While Pirta and Rhodazin were greeting each other, Daisy thought that maybe in the future, Pirta might become a schemer. But right now she was just a kid, and whatever she plotted, it would be a cute, childish prank. Daisy was sure that Hattie was just playing along. Rhodazin and Pirta were sitting in Pirta's room, and Pirta was drawing something. When Rhodazin asked about the drawing, Pirta informed her that it was a picture of the two of them. Daisy was so happy watching them and informed them that she was going to get some snacks. Rhodazin looked at Daisy and asked Pirta if Daisy was going to be her mom. Pirta said yes, and Rhodazin asked when this would happen. Rhodazin started counting on her fingers and said probably after 30 nights. When Pirta asked Rhodazin if she also liked Daisy, she nodded and said yes. Rhodazin told Pirta that her own mom was also this nice. Pirta looked at Rhodazin and patted her shoulder. Rhodazin then added that if your mom is kind, it makes her happy too because they are best friends. After a while, Pirta decided to let Rhodazin touch her hair. Pirta told her that since she was in the inner circle now, the ritual was important. So, Pirta lay down on the ground and told Rhodazin to feel it. Rhodazin touched Pirta's hair and felt that it was really soft. They were both happy and enjoyed their time together. The next day, when the Duke arrived, Pirta came running towards him and hugged him. They both missed each other. Pirta informed the Duke that they had a guest over and that she managed everything. After a while, Daisy came running and asked Pirta not to run by herself. Suddenly, Daisy noticed the Duke. Daisy asked the Duke about his trip, and the Duke asked Daisy about the guest they had yesterday. Daisy suddenly noticed that the Duke was using the fountain pen she had given him as a present. Suddenly, Hattie came and gave a letter from the Imperial Palace to the Duke. Daisy thought it must be regarding the ball. As the letter arrived from the Imperial Palace, Pirta insisted that she wanted to read it. She started reading the letter but could not continue past the first line, which mentioned, "Thank you for your prompt reply. You are accompanying an esteemed guest." She asked her dad what an esteemed guest was. Hattie responded that it meant an honored guest who would be attending with him. After hearing this, Hattie and Pirta both turned around and started looking at Daisy. Daisy had an idea of what was happening. After a while, the Duke asked Pirta and Hattie to leave the room. He then called Daisy and told her that they would be going together as it was too good of an opportunity to pass up. Daisy asked if he was talking about the Imperial Ball. Duke nodded. Daisy then said she was just a commoner with no social standing. But the Duke informed her that he had already taken care of that. He told her that from now on, she was a member of the House of Heidi, a daughter of Viscount Heidi. This way, there would be no problem with her socializing with the other nobles at the ball. The Duke mentioned that it was kind of long and complicated, but he could explain it to her. He also added that he was worried it might make her feel uncomfortable. The Duke thought it would be better for Daisy to have a proper title than remain a commoner, and now, when they do things together, there would be fewer restrictions. After a few minutes, the Duke stood up and asked Daisy if she wanted to go to the ball with him. Daisy was wondering how she would handle being surrounded by so many nobles and what they might think about her involvement with the Duke. While she was pondering this, the Duke repeated himself and asked again, "Will you go to the ball with me?" Daisy held the Duke's hand, and the Duke mentioned that they should give the nobles something to think about. After this, the endless preparations for the ball began right away. As soon as the Duke made up his mind, various merchants visited the mansion daily, including the tailor. All these busy days flew by quickly, and before they knew it, the day of the ball was upon them. Pirta came running towards Daisy and asked if she had everything. She also asked if Daisy had put on her earrings and grabbed her gloves and everything else. Daisy confirmed to Pirta that she had taken everything and not to worry. Daisy asked if Pirta would be alright with Hattie when they were gone. Pirta told them that she had just turned 7, so she wouldn't cause trouble anymore. Hattie also guaranteed that Pirta was in safe hands and not to worry. Daisy thanked Hattie and was completely ready to go to the ball. Dizzy with excitement, she couldn't believe that she was going to the palace as the daughter of a viscount. She also knew that this would be a chance for her to see the suitor she created, and she couldn't lose this opportunity. Daisy asked the Duke if, since he had attended the ball many times, he had met Prince Edward. The Duke responded that he thought he had met him a few times, though Prince Edward was still young, so he hadn't seen him much. Daisy kept talking about the character she created and was really curious to meet him. She kept on talking about his characteristics, how good-natured he was, and the Duke just stared at Daisy. The Duke informed her that the characteristics she described matched Prince Glenn more than Prince Edward. Prince Glenn was the elder brother, 5 years older than Prince Edward. Daisy realized that she would have to wait a few more years to see the suitor she created, but was now excited to hear that there was another character who resembled him. After a while, the Duke and Daisy arrived at the Imperial Palace. The waiters greeted and welcomed the Duke. Daisy couldn't believe she was really in the Imperial Palace. The Duke noticed that Daisy was a bit anxious, so he placed his hand on hers and told her not to worry, assuring her that there was nothing to be concerned about and that they would have a good time for sure. Suddenly, people noticed the Duke and started greeting him. They also saw a new face with him. The Duke introduced Daisy as they had rehearsed, presenting her as Lady Heidi from the House of Heidi. People were confused by this name as they had never heard of it before, so the Duke informed them that they were an esteemed family from Utina. He also mentioned that the House of Henstone had a close relationship with them for a long time. When the Duke looked at Daisy, he had a smile on his face. Seeing his smile, Daisy was relieved, remembering what the Duke had said earlier, that there was nothing to worry about as he had handled the situation well. After a while, the music started playing, and people were dancing. The Duke extended his hand and asked Daisy if she would like to dance with him. People were staring at them both. Daisy took his hand but asked the Duke to forgive her if she stepped on his feet. She also informed him that this would be her first time dancing like this, as she had never danced like this, not even in her previous life. The Duke smiled, happy that it would be her first dance, and that it was with him. They both started dancing, and the Duke's hand was on Daisy's waist. Daisy could feel his breath. People were looking at them and thinking how lovely they looked together. They were amazed as this was the first time the Duke was dancing with someone. After stumbling upon each other a few times, they finished the dance. Daisy got a chance to catch her breath, so she stepped outside of the palace. She felt a bit bad for leaving the Duke inside as girls surrounded him, but she thought that he must be used to it by now. Suddenly, she heard someone crying nearby. When she saw a little boy sitting outside, Daisy asked him if he was lost or needed help. When the boy turned around, she saw that he had brown hair and green eyes. Daisy was shocked and realized that this kid was Prince Edward, the second prince, and the character she had created. Prince Edward asked Daisy not to tell anyone that she had seen him there, promising that if she kept the secret, she would be graciously rewarded in the future. After a while, a man came looking for Edward, and Edward called him his brother. As Daisy turned around, she saw that it was the first prince. Daisy was shocked to see the first prince because he looked exactly like how she had pictured the second prince in her mind. The brown ponytail, handsome eyebrows, and those gentle eyes. She couldn't believe that she was seeing her ideal male character this soon. The first prince asked Daisy who she was, and she responded with her name. The first prince was very casual and informal, and he told Daisy that he wanted to meet her. Daisy was shocked as to why the first prince wanted to meet her. The first prince told Daisy that he should officially introduce himself too. He said that his full name was quite long, so she could call him Glenn. Glenn mentioned that he didn't like to be so formal. Daisy asked him how she could address the prince by his name. But Glenn changed the topic and asked Daisy if she would be dancing with the Duke again after the audience with His Majesty, as people would resume dancing. Glenn told Daisy that it was surprising enough that the Duke was there with someone and that he danced as well. It was big news, but he missed it. So he quickly made a request with the royal painter to paint them if Daisy and the Duke danced again later, so the image would be preserved for a long time. Glenn asked Daisy again if she would be dancing with the Duke. Daisy respectfully declined and said that it would be difficult. She also apologized to Glenn for going against his order, but Glenn was not so formal and started laughing, saying he didn't like to be so formal. Daisy noticed that he talked too much, and she couldn't let herself get stuck in this. She told him that she needed to get inside. As she was going, Glenn had one more thing to ask about the Duke. But suddenly the Duke appeared and told Glenn to ask the question directly to him. Glenn started laughing again, greeted the Duke, and also told him that he almost forgot what he looked like. The Duke also greeted him. The Duke told Glenn that he would come and say hello again later, but for now, he had to excuse them. But Glenn told them they had to answer his questions first. He mentioned that he had heard the Duke mobilized knights to arrest the Dark Guild of Pontypool, and that the Duke was there for the infiltration and rescued a beautiful woman. The Duke confirmed this, and Glenn asked if the beautiful lady was Daisy. The Duke told him that he would tell him more about it next time in detail, as it was not proper to have such a conversation while keeping a lady waiting. The Duke also told Glenn that considering the prestige of the royal family, shouldn't he refrain from speaking in such a manner. Glenn told him not to worry, as nobody paid attention to him anyway. The Duke reminded him that there were still many eyes watching. Suddenly, 2 waiters came and told Glenn that His Majesty was looking for him. Prince Edward was worried and told his brother that he didn't want to go. Glenn reassured his little brother that it wouldn't take long and would be over soon. Glenn turned around, said goodbye to the Duke and Daisy, and gave a wink to Daisy. The Duke asked Daisy to get inside, but Daisy responded with, "Yes, sir," which was problematic because she was not a commoner here. After a while, they went back to their palace. The Duke and Daisy reached their palace late at night and decided to be quiet as Pirta must be sleeping. However, they suddenly saw that Pirta and Hattie were awake but completely drained and exhausted. The Duke picked up Pirta and asked her why she hadn't gone to bed. Hattie informed him that she had been dozing on the couch for a while, waiting for them. The Duke took Pirta to her room and made her sleep. Daisy and the Duke also decided to go to bed, wished each other good night, and left for their respective rooms. As Daisy was heading towards her room, the Duke stood there staring at her. This was the first ball the Duke had been truly excited about, and the reason was that he was there with Daisy. It took him a long time to realize his feelings. Daisy had told him that she wanted to attend the ball, and he wanted her to be happy. So, he traveled all the way to Utina to make it happen. While traveling, he realized that he had feelings for Daisy and admitted to himself that he had completely fallen for her. The next morning, Daisy went to wake up Pirta and told her that it was time for breakfast. Daisy was wondering why the Duke was late, as they were usually the ones who were late. Suddenly, they noticed that the Duke had arrived, and everybody wished him good morning. Hattie started looking up at his schedule, thinking he might have to go somewhere because the Duke was well dressed, differently from usual. When the Duke saw Hattie, he informed him that he didn't have anything scheduled for today. Hattie was left wondering why he was so dressed up. The Duke mentioned that there was no particular rule stating that he could only dress like that when going out. The Duke was trying to figure out how to approach Daisy and casually ask her out on a date. He was tired because he had been up all night thinking about this dilemma. He realized that there were too many staff members in the mansion and that Pirta was always with Daisy, so going out would be the best plan. The Duke thought that if he could take Daisy somewhere she had been wanting to go, it would make it even better, but he worried he wouldn't get a moment to speak with her. When Pirta went with Hattie, the Duke seized the opportunity. He started the conversation by talking about Pontypool, mentioning that there were more beautiful places with stunning sunsets and old ruins. He tried to steer the conversation towards new places and adventures, but nothing seemed to help. Finally, he directly asked Daisy if there was anywhere she would like to go, offering to escort her. Daisy was sitting in her room, thinking about the time when the Duke asked her out on a date. He mentioned that he only wanted it to be the two of them. The next day, Daisy returned to the Duke with a bunch of papers, including a list of all the places she wanted to visit. The Duke wondered if she had stayed up all night to make this. He laughed and agreed to go everywhere on the list. Daisy was reflecting that in her previous life, she had many unfulfilled dreams. One of them was becoming a barista, but even in this life, she ended up in Daisy's shoes, struggling to make ends meet. Hobbies were a luxury she could not afford, but today she was watching an interesting way to brew coffee. The Duke and Daisy were at a coffee shop, and Daisy was explaining to the Duke a method through which you can increase the pressure sufficiently with hot water to filter the coffee. This cafe was the only one in the entire empire that had such equipment. Daisy was really happy to have a cup of coffee, and she also loved the whipped cream in it. It was perfect for her. She asked the Duke if he wanted to try it and mentioned that he could try it from the other side of the cup. The Duke grabbed the cup, wiped the whipped cream from Daisy's face, and started drinking from the same cup. Suddenly, Daisy was about to fall, but the Duke quickly grabbed her hand and told her that another fall was bound to happen, no matter what he said. Daisy wondered if she should be doing this with the main character's father, but soon she forgot about her worries. They started visiting the places on her list. They were on a bridge, and Daisy realized why everyone recommended it. It was beautiful. It was Daisy's first time visiting this place, even though it was a popular destination for many locals. Daisy was really happy when she saw a boat and asked the Duke if they could have a boat ride. The Duke didn't deny her request. Even though he suffered from motion sickness on boats, he was determined to give Daisy anything she wanted. While they were on the boat, the Duke's face turned blue. Daisy asked him to trade places, but he insisted he was fine and would continue. Daisy thought that she could see where Pietra got her stubbornness from. After a while, the Duke was sitting on a chair, still recovering from the boat ride. Daisy wondered if she shouldn't have asked the Duke for a boat ride. After a while, she came close to the Duke and shaded him from the sunlight. Daisy shielded the Duke from the sunlight. The Duke held Daisy's hand and asked her something he was curious about. Daisy noticed that the Duke looked a bit serious. The Duke remarked that as she wrote the novel, she poured her heart into the character with brown hair and green eyes, which seemed to be her preferred style. However, while the Duke was talking, he began thinking about the second prince feeling pressured to step up as the next crown prince, since the first prince was not quite right for the job. The Duke interrupted Daisy's thoughts and asked if his question was too difficult. Daisy, lost in her own world, had not been paying attention. The Duke asked again if she had any other styles she liked. Daisy was once again distracted and didn't understand what the Duke really meant. The Duke suggested that perhaps she might like someone more quiet, serious, and maybe even a little cold on the outside at first, someone who is not so good at expressing his feelings. Daisy then informed the Duke that the future Triumph was a type of guy she used to fangirl over. On a serious note, she said she prefers guys who are kind and warm, like the man in front of her. Both of them looked at each other and blushed deeply. Back at the mansion, Hattie was very anxious and worried about how the Duke was doing out with Daisy. He was pacing in circles, making Pietra dizzy. Rhodazin asked Hattie what he was so stressed about, and Pietra informed her that her dad and Daisy had gone out on an outing today, which made Hattie anxious. Hattie was concerned as Pietra told Rhodazin everything, but Pietra reassured Hattie not to worry since Rhodazin was their ally too. Pietra and Rhodazin hugged each other. Hattie watched them and thought about how happy they were together. After a while, Rhodazin asked Pietra if she was going to the festival tomorrow, where you make paper lanterns and send them up into the sky. Pietra told her she had been to it so many times that she didn't find it fun anymore. Hattie remembered that it was already that time of year, and realized he shouldn't be sitting around as he needed to make some arrangements. After a while, Daisy returned to the palace and Pietra ran to hug her. Hattie asked the Duke if he had a good time, and the Duke just nodded. Hattie thought to himself that the upcoming festival could be used to their advantage. He asked Daisy if she knew about the festival in downtown Pontypool that happens once a year. He also mentioned that it is a festival with a superb view of the lanterns adorning the sky. Daisy said she had heard of it and always wanted to go. The Duke asked if they should go together, and Daisy, excited, said yes. Pietra and Daisy were so happy and excited that they started dancing. Hattie was pleased that everything was going according to his plan. Hattie reached the shore of the sea and wondered what he should do. His first option was to put a bench at the center of the beach so they could enjoy the lanterns as they floated into the sky. His second option was to place a seat at the edge of the beach, but he was concerned that at the edge, they might miss the spectacular view of the countless stars twinkling by the cliff. He considered setting up both, but then the four of them would be separated. After some thought, he decided that Daisy and the Duke could sit separately together. So, he finally decided to prepare both places, allowing Daisy and the Duke to go to the one in the center. Hattie was pleasantly surprised by his own competence. On the day of the festival, when the Duke arrived, Daisy and Pietra went ahead. A worker informed the Duke that 2 locations had been prepared, one at the center and one at the edge of the beach. The Duke thought that Hattie must have made the arrangement for him and Daisy at the edge of the beach, so he went there and saw the place was well decorated. The Duke was excited and started waiting. After a while, Hattie came and asked the Duke why he was sitting there. The Duke explained that he had waited for Hattie at the crossroads for a long time, but Hattie never came. Hattie informed him that the arrangement was made for him at the center of the beach. He pulled the Duke and decided to show him the place, but by then, the beach was completely filled with people. Pietra and Daisy were enjoying the show from the middle of the beach. Hattie and the Duke were disappointed as their plan was ruined. The Duke and Hattie sat at the edge of the beach. The ladies started looking at the arrangements that were made and assumed there was some kind of romantic surprise event, but they noticed that both of them were male. Hattie asked the Duke if he should close the curtains as people were watching them. The Duke replied that it would make it even worse. Pietra and Daisy were really happy watching the show, and Daisy was the happiest since she had never seen this so close. Pietra gathered flowers and gave them to Daisy. They were both happy and hugged each other. When Daisy asked Pietra where Hattie and the Duke were, Pietra informed her not to worry as they had already seen this many times with her. Since it was Daisy's first time, she should enjoy it with Pietra. For Daisy, it was a beautiful night and she hoped it would never end. The next day, when they reached the mansion, there was a letter for both the Duke and Daisy. Daisy wondered who would send a letter to her and noticed that it was from Glenn, the first prince. Duke and Daisy received a letter from Glenn, the first prince. When Hattie asked about it, Daisy informed him that it was an invitation to a party hosted by Prince Glenn. It was a party with horseback riding. Daisy thought a party sounded nice, and she had always wanted to go horseback riding. She couldn't believe she might get to do both at once. It was really exciting for Daisy, and she couldn't wait. However, looking at the Duke, she noticed he was not at all excited. Daisy wondered if the Duke, having been invited to many of these parties, had gotten used to all of this by now. Suddenly, Daisy told the Duke not to worry about it and suggested they go together. The Duke changed his mind and thought that showing his face at an event like this wouldn't be a bad idea. Hattie asked Daisy if she knew how to ride a horse. Daisy didn't, but the Duke intervened in the conversation and said he would teach her. Several days later, on the day of the party, the Duke and Daisy arrived. Both of them were sitting on a horse. Daisy couldn't believe she was at a party hosted by the prince on the royal family's property, and she was really glad to be in her shoes. The Duke helped Daisy get down from the horse when suddenly Glenn came up to greet them both. He thanked them for coming. Daisy mentioned that it was an honor to be there. Glenn patted Daisy on the shoulder and told her there was no need for such formality with him. The Duke, feeling a bit jealous, got in the middle of them and thanked the prince again for having them. The prince told them that he was the one who was grateful, as since the Duke came, all the other guests were also excited. Everybody took a seat at the dining table. Glenn told Daisy that Edward remembered her by name, but Edward was upset that Daisy had called him a kid. Glenn also asked Daisy if she would come over when Edward was present. Glenn told Daisy that Edward might act prickly, but he was sure Edward would be happy to see her. Suddenly, the Duke asked the prince about his new residence currently being built in Villainess. He said it would be completed soon and he wanted to invite friends over. The Duke also mentioned that it would be nice if Glenn came with the second prince. The Duke told him that a change of scenery would do him good. Daisy wondered if Villainess was far from their place and the Duke's residence, and why he would want to go there. Suddenly, she remembered that the Duke was trying to keep Prince Edward away from Little Chestnut. Prince Glenn was really happy and told the Duke he couldn't refuse this invitation. Daisy thought that another meeting with the second prince would allow them to gather more clues about the future so they could be prepared. Daisy looked around and noticed that there were many young and good-looking men and women there. 2 women came and praised Daisy, saying they had heard she was in charge of the ladies' education. But Daisy thought to herself that the only thing she had taught Little Chestnut was how to fold a paper pumpkin. Daisy was feeling really hungry, but nobody was touching the food. The Duke noticed this, and he started taking some food, and Daisy was worried that everybody was staring. A hush fell over the crowd as the Duke lifted his fork to his lips. Anticipation hung heavy in the air, all eyes fixated on the man who held so much power. Glenn, ever the observant one, recognized the growing unease and took it upon himself to ease the tension. With a warm smile and a booming voice that carried across the gathering, he announced, "The Duke has graciously decided to inaugurate the feast. Let us all partake in the culinary delights prepared by the palace's talented patissier this very morning. I assure you, these cakes and sweets are unlike anything you've ever tasted before." A murmur of excitement rippled through the crowd. Food, after all, was a universal unifier, and the promise of fresh, delectable treats was enough to momentarily distract them from the Duke's stoic presence. A particularly enthusiastic guest, a portly gentleman with a handlebar mustache, leaned forward and called out, "Do tell, good sir, is the renowned lemon pie on the menu today?" Glenn chuckled heartily. "Why, my dear fellow," he boomed, "that was the very first item out of the oven this morning. The kitchens were abuzz with activity at dawn, and I can assure you, the aroma alone was enough to set one's mouth watering." With that, the dam broke. Conversations erupted as people eagerly dug into the spread before them. The clatter of cutlery mingled with satisfied sighs and appreciative murmurs. The tension that had initially gripped the atmosphere melted away, replaced by the simple pleasure of enjoying a delicious meal in good company. Daisy, initially hesitant, eventually succumbed to the tempting aromas and joined the revelry. After a delightful repast, the urge for some postprandial activity stirred. The idea of a leisurely horse ride by the ocean was unanimously agreed upon. As they mounted their steeds, a cool breeze carrying the salty tang of the sea whipped at their faces, a refreshing contrast to the warmth of the afternoon sun. Daisy, accustomed to the open fields surrounding her home, found a new thrill in riding along the shoreline. The rhythmic crash of the waves against the shore provided a natural soundtrack to their journey, and she realized with a touch of surprise that she was quite the adept rider. The Duke, ever watchful, noticed a particularly strong wave approaching and leaned towards Daisy. "The waves are getting a bit rough here," he cautioned gently. "Be careful, Daisy." Daisy flashed him a reassuring smile. "No need to worry, Your Grace," she replied confidently. "I have a very good teacher, after all." Suddenly, a new rider emerged from a nearby path. A beautiful woman, her fiery red hair cascading down her back, rode a magnificent black stallion towards the Duke. Her eyes widened in surprise as she saw him. "Well, Duke," she drawled, her voice dripping with amusement, "what a delightful surprise to see you in such an informal setting. I must confess, I've only ever encountered you at the most prestigious balls." The air crackled with a subtle tension. It was clear the woman was attempting to flirt with the Duke, her words laced with a suggestive undercurrent. The Duke, however, remained unfazed. "Indeed," he replied politely, his voice betraying no emotion. "However, I must point out the danger of our horses being in such close proximity. Perhaps you could." He trailed off, gesturing for her to move away slightly. The woman's cheeks flushed a rosy pink. She stammered a brief apology and nudged her horse back onto the path, clearly flustered by the Duke's rebuff. Just then, Glenn rode up beside Daisy, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "Splendid horsemanship, Daisy," he declared, his voice laced with a hint of admiration. He leaned closer, his gaze lingering on her face for a beat too long. "There's something truly special about you, Daisy," he began, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Before Daisy could pry further into his cryptic remark, her horse whinnied sharply and bolted forward. Startled, Daisy lost her grip on the reins and tumbled headfirst into the cool embrace of the ocean. A collective gasp rose from the onlookers as they witnessed the unexpected plunge. Daisy surfaced, sputtering and disoriented, mortified by the sudden turn of events. The weight of countless eyes staring down at her only amplified her humiliation. She sank back under the water, wishing for the earth to swallow her whole. Suddenly, a loud splash echoed beside her. She flinched, bracing herself for another unwanted encounter, only to find Glenn beside her, his hair plastered to his forehead and a wide grin splitting his face. "Refreshing, isn't it?" As the people saw their first prince on the ground, they all started rushing towards him. Daisy thought it was her chance to get up. Suddenly, the Duke approached and gave Daisy a towel. He picked her up and asked Glenn if he was all right. The Duke then carried Daisy away in his arms while people stared at them. Glenn watched the Duke and Daisy very closely from a distance. It was time for every guest to leave. Everyone was saying goodbye to the first prince. The Duke and Daisy also came to bid farewell to the prince. Daisy thanked the first prince for having them and mentioned that she had a really good time. Glenn told Daisy that he was the one who was grateful for her being there. In her mind, Daisy was wondering all she did was make a fool of herself by falling into the water. Glenn was about to say something to Daisy, but the Duke interrupted, thanked the prince for inviting them, and said they should be going. As they left, Daisy turned to Glenn and mentioned the earlier incident when he saved her. She apologized and thanked him. Glenn acted as if he didn't know what she was talking about. Daisy informed him that she knew he fell into the water on purpose. Glenn smiled and said he wouldn't do that, insisting it was a pure accident. Daisy smiled, thinking that Prince Glenn was a terrible liar. The prince told Daisy that it was chivalry. He was being chivalrous. After the Duke and Daisy reached their palace, they rushed to Pirta's room and saw that Pirta was crying loudly, saying that something fell off. Daisy was worried and asked if she had fallen while sleeping, but Pirta showed Daisy the hairband Daisy had gifted her. It was broken, and one of the pumpkins had fallen off the hairband. The Duke and Daisy were relieved that it was nothing serious. Pirta informed Daisy that she wore it last night before sleeping, and when she woke up, she found it broken with one of the pumpkins fallen off the band. The Duke informed Pirta to take care of the things she cared about, and Pirta started crying loudly again. Daisy told Pirta not to worry as she could fix it. She promised to go back to the store and ask them to repair it. Pirta hugged Daisy and told her that she was the best. Later, when Daisy went to the store, she requested the store woman to repair it. The woman informed her that it would take about 3 to 4 days, and Daisy was fine with that. Daisy asked the store woman to fix it so that it never falls off again. The store woman assured Daisy that they would let her know once it was done. As Daisy came out of the store, she wondered what else she could do to cheer up Pirta. She thought of bringing her some pumpkin cookies to make her feel better. Suddenly, Glenn appeared from behind and scared Daisy. She turned around, shocked to see him there in very informal attire. Glenn told Daisy that it was nice seeing her in such a different setting. Daisy was addressing him as the prince, but he asked her not to do so, explaining that if the nobles who knew him saw him here, it would be a big headache for him. Daisy was shocked, never imagining that she would run into the first prince in the market. Glenn asked Daisy where she was headed. She informed him that she was in the market running some errands. Glenn, without wasting time, told Daisy that it was such a happy coincidence that they met and asked her to have lunch together. But Daisy wondered if he was asking her to go to the palace. However, Glenn quickly clarified that he had barely escaped that place and had no intention of returning anytime soon. Despite his invitation, Daisy hesitated about the lunch, unsure of what to expect. Sensing her reluctance, Glenn began to act disappointed, expressing that he might have to eat alone. He earnestly requested her company, and after some persuasion, Daisy finally agreed to join him. Daisy was anxious about finding a place that would satisfy the refined tastes of a prince. She wondered where she could take him that would meet his standards. But it seemed like Glenn had come prepared. He confidently told Daisy that he knew an excellent place and urged her to come with him. Daisy couldn't help but wonder if Glenn often escaped from the palace, as he seemed quite familiar with the city streets and knew his way around very well. They soon arrived at their destination, Chez Nous, the restaurant where Daisy used to work. The moment Daisy recognized the place, panic set in. She feared running into someone she knew, which could lead to the prince being identified. She quickly grabbed Glenn's hand and started running away from the restaurant. When Glenn questioned her sudden urgency, Daisy explained that she knew a better place and promised to take him there. After a while, they found themselves sitting in a different restaurant. Glenn, looking around, commented that it might not be suitable for nobles, considering its modest ambience. Daisy, however, reassured him, explaining that her hobby was discovering hidden culinary gems and must-eat places around the city. Their conversation soon turned to what makes a good restaurant. They discussed how both the ambience and the quality of the food are crucial. Deciding to order, Glenn glanced at the menu and noticed that the special of the day was beef. He asked Daisy if she was craving beef, but Daisy advised against it. She explained that sometimes restaurants put items on the special or recommended section to use up remaining ingredients. Glenn was amazed by Daisy's insights and asked how she knew so much about the restaurant business. She modestly replied that she knew her way around restaurants quite well. Daisy then recommended trying the pork dishes, which the restaurant was known for. They ordered the pork, and as they started eating, they found the food to be exceptionally delicious. Both of them thoroughly enjoyed their meal. During their conversation, Glenn shared that when he ventures out into the city, he goes by the name Len. He explained that he chose this name because both Glenn and Len end with N, making it an easy alias for him to remember. As they laughed and enjoyed each other's company, Glenn's expression suddenly turned serious. He asked Daisy if he could inquire about something personal. Daisy, intrigued but not alarmed, told him to go ahead. Glenn then asked if she had a close relationship with the Duke. Daisy was taken aback by the question, shocked and unsure of how to respond. Daisy was utterly shocked by the prince's question regarding her close relationship with the Duke. Glenn elaborated that he had observed the two of them often seen together at various social events and gatherings. He admitted that he had no idea they lived under the same roof until he discovered it yesterday during tea. Daisy, trying to maintain her composure, informed him that she was in charge of educating the Duke's daughter, and teaching her etiquette and manners was most effective if she was by her side all the time. Glenn then asked Daisy if this meant they just had a professional relationship with the Duke. Daisy began to wonder, reflecting on the fact that they had gone on a date not too long ago. Her heart pounded and she blushed every time she saw the Duke, but there was nothing officially between them. She chose not to say a word to Glenn about these thoughts. Glenn, noticing her discomfort, apologized if his question was too difficult. After a while, Daisy returned to the palace. As soon as Pirta saw her coming, she rushed towards Daisy with great enthusiasm and asked if her headband could be fixed, and if they could restore it exactly to how it was before. Daisy gave Pirta a reassuring pat on the head and told her not to worry, assuring her that they could indeed fix it. Pirta was visibly relieved. Holding Daisy's hand, Pirta eagerly told her to come with her as she wanted to show her something special. She led Daisy to her room where the Duke and Hattie were sitting. They were in the middle of making a house out of chocolate. The Duke and Hattie greeted Daisy warmly. The only thing left to complete the chocolate house was to attach the chocolate door. Hattie asked Daisy why she was so late, mentioning that Pirta had been upset because of her delay. To cheer her up, the Duke and Hattie had put in a lot of effort. Daisy approached Pirta and apologized for being late, explaining that she had run into someone while she was downtown. The Duke, curious, asked who she had run into. Daisy responded that she had happened to meet Prince Glenn in the city. The Duke's reaction was immediate and intense. He was angry upon hearing this and broke the chocolate door he had in his hand. Everybody in the room was stunned by his reaction. Pirta started crying as the door was broken, and it was the last piece needed to complete the house. She cried loudly, her distress echoing through the room, but the Duke left the room abruptly. Hattie, who had been with the Duke for a long time, had never expected to see him so deeply affected by what seemed to be unrequited love. Hattie approached the Duke and remarked on how remarkable the first prince was. He commented that sneaking out of the palace to enjoy the city must be the prince's favorite hobby. Hattie noticed that the Duke was quite annoyed by the prince, and he found the situation somewhat amusing. Hattie further added that Daisy must also be amazed by the prince's amiability. The Duke, who was writing something on a piece of paper, froze. Hattie was intentionally saying all these things to provoke jealousy in the Duke. He began to elaborate, telling the Duke that it sounded like Daisy and the prince had a long and pleasant conversation, and she must have laughed so much that her stomach hurt. He also mentioned that he had never seen Miss Daisy so animated and full of life. The Duke, feeling a cold shiver, asked Hattie if he was being too cold towards others. Hattie replied that the Duke was more guarded than cold, which was an issue. He explained to the Duke that if he liked something, he should express it. If he was happy, he should show it. If he found something lovely, he should let it be known. And if he disliked something, he shouldn't be afraid to express it. Only then would the other person understand his true feelings. Hattie wanted to instill these thoughts in the Duke's mind to encourage him to confess his love to Daisy. The Duke, struggling with his emotions, asked if he really had to express all those feelings. Hattie, emphasizing their long friendship, informed the Duke that he felt compelled to say these things. He warned that if this continued, Daisy might choose Prince Glenn over him, and he would be powerless to do anything about it afterwards. The Duke was deeply terrified upon hearing this, realizing the gravity of the situation. Later that night, a letter with a red seal arrived at the Duke's residence. The red seal indicated that the letter contained an urgent message. The next day at dawn, the Duke was getting ready and was thinking about all the things Hattie and he discussed the previous night. Hattie had mentioned that Prince Glenn had a very vibrant personality, was genuine, and was not afraid to just be himself. That was his charm. He was very good at expressing himself. Hattie cautioned the Duke that he might not be in the running anymore if he left for Burness without expressing his feelings. As the Duke was leaving, he asked Daisy to stay safe. Daisy reassured him that Pirta wouldn't be meeting the second prince until much later in the future, but she was sure the situation still worried the Duke. She also told him she would come up with a plan, whatever it took. However, the Duke was thinking about something else. He was reflecting on Hattie's advice: if you express your feelings, only then will the other person know. So, the Duke moved forward, leaned towards Daisy, hugged her tightly, and gave her a kiss on the cheek. He told her he would be back soon. Daisy nodded. The Duke also mentioned that he would miss her. Later that day, whatever Daisy was doing and wherever she was sitting, she was lost in her thoughts. One particular line kept revolving in her mind, the Duke telling her that he was going to miss her. Trying to change her mood, Daisy patted Pirta's head. Pirta told Daisy that whenever she did that, it reminded her of her dad. Daisy was struggling to get him out of her head, but Pirta continued talking about her father. Suddenly, Hattie arrived and told Daisy that there was a letter for her. Pirta wondered if it could be from her dad, but it was from Prince Glenn. Hattie was curious about what the prince had written. Daisy informed him that the prince said he wanted to pay them a visit. The next day, Hattie was explaining to Daisy that he could understand the prince wishing to stop by when the royal carriage was in the area, but he questioned why it had to be when the Duke wasn't home. Hattie mumbled to himself that they couldn't refuse the prince, so he turned to Daisy and told her that since the prince would be stopping by on business, he likely wouldn't stay long. Hattie suggested they should keep the visit short to not inconvenience the prince, offering him just 1 cup of tea. Hattie was determined, as he wanted Daisy to spend as little time with the prince as possible while the Duke was not in the city. The prince arrived, stepping down from his carriage. Daisy welcomed him. The prince asked if he was being an inconvenience by visiting on such short notice. Glenn was being very formal, and Daisy found it surprising since he didn't use such language at the palace. After a while, the prince started laughing and told Daisy, "I got you." He was pranking Daisy and asked if she was surprised by his sudden formality. The people around were shocked, but suddenly a box opened, and the second prince emerged from it. Everybody freaked out. It was Edward, the future suitor. He met Glenn. Daisy was distressed, thinking this couldn't happen. The little chestnut was inside the palace, and they couldn't let the second prince, Edward, meet Pirta. As Prince Glenn and Daisy navigate their unexpected encounter and the arrival of Prince Edward, tensions rise within the palace walls. With emotions running high and secrets unfolding, will Daisy's carefully laid plans withstand the arrival of this new suitor? How will the Duke react upon his return? And what lies ahead for Daisy as she faces these new challenges? The next chapter promises to unravel these mysteries and more, leaving readers eagerly anticipating the twists and turns that lie ahead. Let's see that in the next video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.